Good morning and welcome to Focus today. We're going to be doing kind of a catch-up a little bit today as far as the day is concerned with people we have talked to before, and probably more important now than ever to talk about some of these issues. Our guest is SteveForbes. He's on the phone with us today, and of course you're familiar with him. You know Forbes magazine. He's also run for president, and he gets around a lot, that's for sure. SteveForbes with us today. Good morning, Steve. Are you there? Is he through the phone system of theDove? I hear he's on the phone line, but I'm not sure that I hear him yet. Are you there, Steve? All right, well, we don't seem to have him right now. Will we be getting him here in a couple seconds? All right, in about 10 seconds we'll have him. Well, you know, the news has been such that we've been focusing a lot on Middle East conflict in that area, and I think he's with us now. SteveForbes, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you for being with us. Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
You know, I was mentioning that when we look at the international news, it's kind of shifted a lot. The whole concept of the economy being the most important thing has just been, I think, slightly sidelined from the news standpoint because of what's happening in Egypt and so on. But this is certainly an issue that we need to be talking more about. And if I can review this a little bit, was it back in 1995 that you first officially kind of proposed the flat tax of about 15%? Was that back in 95?
That was indeed.
Wow.
And first did it as a political issue. I'd been advocating it years before as a journalist.
And you were working with Bob Dole, I think, at that point, weren't you, with the flat tax in the early stages?
Yes. Well, he was opposed to it, and so I was running in favor of it, and he was running as an agnostic.
and that's really when the debate started then, way back in 95, right?
That's right. And since then, over 30 countries around the world have adopted it. Variation of it, and it's worked pretty well.
Talk a little bit about that. The countries who have adopted it, while we still have not, and I think a lot of us would like to think, let's make it simple, 15%, whatever the percentage might be, would be simpler. Who are these countries and why have they adopted it?
They range from Hong Kong, which has done it for 60 years. Big countries like Russia. One thing Putin did right early on, 12 years ago, he put in a flat tax. His was 13%. And within a couple of years, revenues had doubled, both from economic growth and from better collections. You have small countries such as Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia have adopted it. So Jamaica has it. So a range of countries, large, small, and in between.
Why is it so difficult for us to look at this seriously and do the same?
One is the political structure is very happy with the things the way they are now. It's a huge source of power, complexity, and a huge source of contributions. You know, the code has been changed 14,000 times since 1986, and that's why members of tax writing committees always are their treasure chests are always full of contributions. It's a huge source of power. People trying to get a break, companies trying to get a break. Half the lobbying in Washington revolves one way or the other around the tax code.
Yeah, is it as simple as it sounds? Let's say we take the percentage of 15%. What you make, 15% goes to the government. Is that as complicated as it gets?
Just about. There are exemptions, deductions for adults and for kids. The feeling being you should be allowed to keep some of your money for raising your family and supporting yourself. And so, say a family of four, your first $46,000 would be free of federal income tax, no tax on savings, and no death tax. I always believe that you should be allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS. But you could literally do your tax return with a few keystrokes on your PC or a single sheet of paper.
All right. Now, and perhaps the reference to the other countries that you mentioned might be coming into play with this question, dealing with what's it going to take for us to be able to move towards finally having this? Where's the pressure going to have to come from, you think, for the U.S. to adopt something like this?
I think it's going to have to come from the public. We've got elections coming in, congressional elections in 2014, presidential election in 2016, and citizens just have to start peppering candidates, especially in primaries, with questions. What are you doing about simplifying this horrific, corrupt tax code? And I think that there is a consensus. I think a lot of Democrats are in favor of simplifying the code. I think this thing cuts across the board. 3 years ago, President Obama appointed a commission to study federal finances. It was called the Simpson-Bowles Commission, and the recommendations, of course, like most commissions, were ignored. But on that commission, Democrats and Republicans both signed on to the idea of the concept of simplifying the code and reducing tax rates across the board. They didn't go as far as I would like, but they certainly moved in the right direction. So I think there's a consensus across the political spectrum. We've got to get rid of this horrific code. If you add up all the words in the tax code and all the rules and regulations that go with it, we're talking about 9 or 10 million words. And there's not a single human being in the world who understands that whole thing.
That's right.
It's ridiculous.
Well, let me ask you, you kind of alluded to something there, that we're seeing some parts of this perhaps being implemented. Does this have to be an all-or-nothing plan, all at once, a major overhaul, or do you see this as possibly one road to success in getting the flat tax is some sort of implementation over time?
I think if we're going to do it, we've got to at least pass the thing at once. If you want to phase in for some parts of the corporate part of the tax code, that would be fine. But if you try to tinker with the existing code, all you're going to get is like those monster movies where the beast comes out of the lagoon or the swamp and terrorizes us again. Back in 1986, they took a stab at simplifying the code, but they kept the old code. They got the number of brackets down to 2. And within 36 months, they were junking it up again, big time. So I think we just got to kill the beast and start over.
Let me ask you something. This just kind of comes to mind, and I'm not sure how successful these have been, but we've seen some movies, for example, documentary. You mentioned this beast, like the monster from the Black Lagoon, and I've got the image in my mind of all of that. Michael Moore has done a lot with his political causes to promote something like that. We've seen some on the right as well. I think of Dinesh D'Souza has done some of that to try to forward a specific thought or concept. Have you thought of taking this, because I'm trying to think how you can be successful when a lot of people are wondering, well, I'm not sure if we should move this or not. Have you thought with your background and the resources you have of perhaps coming up with your own kind of a documentary type thing to forward the flat tax concept?
It's not a bad idea, and I think online people could do very simplified versions of it, and I'd love to have a lot of people working on that. And one of the things that could be done is when you put in the new flat tax, is because people do get hung up, well, I lose this deduction, well, I lose that deduction, and they don't focus on all the savings they're going to get, is give people a choice. Hong Kong does a variation of this. Give people a choice between taking the new code, or if you lack self-esteem and you want to go through all the rigmarole of the current code, you can stick with the current code and file under the complicated old code. See which one is better for you.
Let me just
give people a choice.
Let me have you respond to one of the arguments that the flat tax might increase the tax burden on the poor and make it easier on wealthy Americans. How do you see that?
Actually, the nice thing about it is by removing all the junk from the code, you can't hide income anymore. If you make it, you pay it. And in terms of lower-income people, this thing was designed so that their tax burden would not go up. And because it would lead to a more vibrant economy, they would have more prospects of improving their incomes, improving their job skills. And certainly with the unemployment and underemployment we have in our economy today, with a lot of part-time jobs and a lot of people who like full-time, I think flat tax would be just what the doctor ordered. Growth is good for everybody, but lower-income people would not pay more. In fact, they'd pay less under a flat tax than they do under our current arrangements.
You know, I have a feeling that you, probably the questions I've been asking, you have been asked so many times that you're thinking, what do I have to say to make people really get it at this point? Let's look down the line, because you're a person who likes to see where we're going to be and what we need to do now to make the changes. We're in a relatively prosperous time, if I can use that term. People without jobs don't see it that way, but certainly the Wall Street and stocks are doing quite well, and from that perspective. Where do you see us in 5 years? Is that going to continue, or do you think there might be some changes?
Oh, I think there's going to be a lot of change. I think you're going to see a real push for tax simplification. So I think we're going to get that in radical form, real reform in 5 years. I also think we're going to see reform of how we treat the dollar. One of the reasons why we're in the mess we're in today is trashing the value of the U.S. dollar, making it uncertain. It's like changing the minutes of an hour in the clock. It just creates confusion and hurts growth. So I think you're going to see reform of the dollar, reform of the tax code, and I also think you're going to see positive reform on health care. Clearly, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is falling on its own complexity and inherent contradictions and expenses. You know, the White House the other day, without any legal authority, announced they're going to postpone at least the big business part of it for a year, which raises the question, if you're doing it for large businesses, why don't you do it for individuals? Let them have a year before this thing kicks in. So I think that thing is falling apart, and I think there's going to be a real push to have a situation where patients are in charge again instead of third parties and bureaucracies.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you decide to come up with a movie to help move us so that in 5 years we're not in a worse situation than we are now, I think you need to incorporate the monster from the Black Lagoon. And you can give us credit for that, all right?
You're right.
Steve Forbes, thank you very much. It's always great. I'm glad I had the chance to finally talk to you. Perry's talked to you a couple times. This is terrific. We'll keep looking at your thoughts there and see what the next thing might be, because I think we're going to be hearing more about this. And thank you for being on with us today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Steve Forbes with us here on Focus today. Coming up, we have Susan Allen, who's the author of a book called The Remarkable Ronald Reagan. Yeah, so start thinking about what you think is remarkable in your own definition. We'll find out hers as well. That comes up in just a couple minutes right here on Focus Today.